bad whiskey, novel reading, and masturbation. These are just a few of the reasons that someone could have been admitted to Transalgany Hospital back in the 1800s. It would take the signature of 2 doctors to admit you into the asylum, but assuming you lived through the horrors of the institution, it would take a whole lot more to get you out. Today on Hellish History, we go into Asylums. Transalgany Lunatic Asylum is one of the largest hand-cut stone buildings in the world, second only to the Kremlin. The people who ran Transalgany wanted the asylum to be self-reliant, so on the property there are waterworks, a dairy, and a cemetery, amongst other things. All in all, the land that Transalgany Lunatic Asylum takes up is 666 acres. The acreage being equal to the number of the beast nowadays is the only creepy thing about the asylum. But back when it was up and running, it was a lot worse. The horrifying treatments used on patients in this asylum, which we'll get to later, were only part of the problem. Transalgany was made to hold roughly 240 patients at a time, but at one point in its operation, it held nearly 10 times that, with over 2,400 patients inside of it. The immense overcrowding would lead to violence inside of the asylum. In one reported incident, 2 patients tried to hang another patient, but when they felt he wasn't dying fast enough, they cut him down and smashed in his head with a metal bed frame. Not even the staff were safe in Transalgany. One day, one of the nurses went missing, and she wasn't found until 2 months later at the bottom of a stairwell. They said they hadn't found her because that stairwell just wasn't well used. It hasn't been until fairly recently in medical history that we figured out how to treat mental illness properly and humanely. One common method was shock therapy, in which a patient would receive electric shocks through the temple in the head. It's as painful and just awful as a treatment as it sounds. Also, in the early days of these asylums, bloodletting had yet to be banned and so was still used to treat mental illness. This practice has been around since ancient Greece, and over the years many tools have been used to practice bloodletting. People have used knives. They've used specially made spring-loaded blades that were made just for the purpose of bloodletting. They also probably used a straight razor because doctors weren't the ones who did the bloodletting. It was barbers. If you've ever wondered why you've seen a red and white striped pole outside a barber shop, that's because the white is to resemble bandages, the red to resemble blood. Dark and morbid carryover from an all too recent era. Doctors were aware of the practice, though. In an American medical journal, now known as the American Journal of Psychiatry, but formerly known as the American Journal of Insanity, one doctor wrote an article about bloodletting called Bloodletting in Mental Illness. The very first line of this article is, "To bleed or not to bleed? That is the question." It took people all too long to realize that bloodletting just did not work and was just killing people. It wasn't banned until the very late 1800s. Another common medical practice that was actually used in hospitals rather than barber shops was the lobotomy. There were several types of lobotomy, but the most well-known is the transorbital or ice pick lobotomy. An American doctor named Walter Freeman got tired of doing lobotomies the slow, old-fashioned way of cutting into a person's head and putting them under and actually operating on a brain. It took far too long. He wanted something a little quicker, and he had heard of an Italian doctor who was doing lobotomies through patients' eye sockets. Wanting to try this out for himself, he went into his home kitchen, got his ice pick and a hammer, and started practicing. Soon enough, Freeman figured out how to perform the ice pick lobotomy. If you're squeamish, you might just want to brace yourself for this next part, because I'm going to tell you exactly how it works. A doctor would take an ice pick and insert it into the top part of the patient's eye. Once into the eye, he would hammer it through to break through the rather delicate front part of the skull. Once in, he would just stir about the brain until the procedure was complete. It was not perfect. A lot of people died from it. It was just awful. The thing is, Freeman started to get pretty chill about this whole ice pick lobotomy thing and would do it as an outpatient procedure, just charging people $25 to come on in and get their brains mixed up. Dr. Freeman would go on to tour the country to teach people how to perform lobotomies. He traveled in his van that he called, and I wish I was joking when I said this, but he literally called his van the Lobotomobile. Through the years, Freeman would do over 3,500 lobotomies. 19 of his patients were minors, the youngest of which was a 4-year-old child. As Aaron Mahnke said in his podcast Lore, ironically enough, people still don't believe in monsters. That's all I have for this very first episode of Hellish History. If you have an idea for a future episode you'd like to see, you can leave a suggestion down in the comments. If you want to see more creepy and morbid content, please subscribe. If we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. That's all I have today. Goodbye. In an attempt to not end this video on a total down note, I'll give you some... No, actually, let's end it there. Let's end it on a down note. I want it to be said.